welcome to everybody. I'm Francesca Bosco, and I work for the UN. Lately, maybe we're going to see what exactly is the strange acronym that I'm working for. I'm actually a strange thing. I'm a kind of like a hybrid because I've been working in the, let's say, information security industry / academia / government for like 9 years. And I'm very happy to be here. This is not usually my Italian accent. I have a very bad flu, so I will try to speak very loud. I hope you can listen to me in the very end. This is more or less what we're going to see today. There are going to be some parts that are kind of like heavy because a lot of data and a lot of numbers. But what I really would like to tell you is a kind of like a story, okay? What we're going to see is basically how cybercrime evolved during the years, and especially what I would like to focus on is how cybercrime is not anymore, let's say, that kind of like romantic idea of the hacker behind all the different attacks that we are seeing, but how groups are getting more and more organized, and also if it's possible to make a distinction, for example, between the traditional organized criminal groups that we are used to, or, I mean, if we are confronting, let's say, with new tribes, with new groups. As I mentioned, I will start with some numbers. Usually, I'm very unpopular in the security industry because I always say, don't trust estimates. I'm very sorry to say it, but don't trust numbers. We need to work with numbers, and that's why I'm flooding you with charts and with different numbers and estimates and so on and so forth. But it's extremely difficult to have reliable data for several reasons. I mean, because most of the information that we're getting them from security vendors, which is very good, but usually they have their own methodology to collect the data, so it's very difficult to compare. And also, on the other hand, it's very important to have data because, for example, I can speak for member states. Member states need to understand the extent of the problem before investing money, for example, investing resources, before starting doing, I don't know, policies and legislations regarding a certain topic. So data on one end is extremely important. On the other end, we need to be very careful. And that's why I tried to give you some example and some general, let's say, overview. This is an interesting estimates because basically what they were trying to say is we can count cybercrime as a percentage of GDP. And so, I mean, if you're going to download the slides, you will see maybe a little bit better. But you can see every country with the percentage of GDP represented by cybercrime. There's also a funny thing because within the end of a year and the beginning of the new one, everybody gets crazy. The sky is always falling. I don't know if you noticed it, but usually the estimates are growing incredibly towards the end of a year because basically, okay, the attacks and the threats for 2014 were this, and that. And for 2015, we're waiting for very scary things. Again, the point is always trying to understand not the perfect numbers, but trying to understand more or less what we are facing. And I try to combine some of the various sources that I found. And actually, the estimates are more or less between the 50 and 20% of the value created by the internet is created by criminals, okay, by cybercrime. Cybercrime has another big, huge problem. Unfortunately, I'm a lawyer. I'm a recovering lawyer, as I like to say. But lawyers love definitions, okay? I know that for the normal world, they are totally useless, but lawyers love definitions. Why? Because if we have a definition, for example, of cybercrime, then we can have the same language, okay? And unfortunately, in this moment, we don't have that. We have some international instruments that are kind of like working, even if a bit outdated, but we don't have, for example, a transnational understanding international understanding of what cybercrime is. So it depends on the country that you go to, and you might have different type of offenses recognized as cybercrime. So that's another reason why it's very difficult to do this kind of exercise. But at least we get an idea. And it's interesting because it's basically like putting cybercrime in a sort of like chart with all the other different type of crime. And I don't know if you're following, let's say, the narrative regarding cybercrime. And at one point there was this constant idea, oh, it amounts at 1 trillion, it amounts at 1 trillion, amounts at 1 trillion. How it came out in this way. The first Obama speech about cybercrime, I mean, the first official speech about the estimates and costs of cybercrime, we're not sure about how he got the estimate. And this article is really interesting because explaining how also myths are created, kind of. Natalia is here. I really appreciated yesterday when she was speaking about myths of different things. One of the myths of cybercrime is that it costs 1 trillion. And it's funny because since Obama said it, then everybody was saying it. So this 1 trillion number estimated was taken by the different international news. It came up to Interpol, and the Interpol director said, oh yeah, but cybercrime, it costs 1 trillion. And at one point, when confronted like, yes, but how did you get the estimate exactly? And everybody was like, oh, well, there's a report, and if you go, it's a semantic report. And if you go really, really into details, and the article is explained this, it's not exactly 1 trillion, or maybe, I mean, it's not exactly the real amount of cybercrime. But that's how you quickly create myths. And that's a reason for this. For example, in my institute, we also train journalists because we understand that it's very important also to communicate this topic properly. And one of the challenges is that clearly you want to know things that are making, the big hit. And so that's why you hamper always things that might punch in the stomach of the people, basically. And that's why sometimes we have this kind of like strange data. I decided to bring you also some other sources, so if you need them for your work. Instead of like giving you numbers, I try to put the topic into a context, okay? There's an interesting report from the World Economic Forum. It's called Global Risk Landscape. And it's good because basically it's placing the different risk, and I highlighted the one related to technology. So there's misuse of technology, data fraud or theft, cyber attacks, and critical information infrastructure breakdown into the big picture. Okay, so for example, social instability, food crisis, terrorist attacks. So how likely we're gonna face this type of threats. And again, this is very important because at the very beginning, the global risk landscape was not really encompassing any type of like technology misuse. There was something on the critical information infrastructure protection, but still it's very important that nowadays it's considered one of the main risks. And it's also interesting to understand that sometimes when working in the cybercrime and cybersecurity community, you think that the world ends basically within your bits and bytes that you're dealing with. And for me, it's the same because I always think, oh my God, cybercrime is it's the first problem that we have. Clearly, you need to put it into context, and this is helping in trying to understand how the different type of risk and threats are interconnected. I don't know if you know this source. How many of you know what ENISA is? Okay, so basically ENISA, it's a European agency. And it's devoted specifically to information security, information infrastructure protection. And what happened is that they understood what I was saying before, like it's not really possible to come out with sound data and numbers regarding the different threats. So what we are trying to do is we collect all the different reports available, and we try to compare them. And that's why I really like this source, because at least it's giving you the idea of the different trends. For example, this is from the very last report, and you have the trends for 2013. As you might see, the only stable trend were botnets. And you have the top threats for 2014. So some, let's say, newcomers, and you have some very few that are like decreasing. Botnets, there's a reason for that. How many of you have heard of the EC3? EC3 is the new Europol, kind of like, I call them super cops. I know that it's strange, but basically Europol has a new section that is dealing specifically with cybercrime, okay? It's a sort of like highly specialized part of Europol. They have also a lot of different type of cooperation with other international law enforcement. There's one interesting task force that is called JCAT, for example, with the FBI. And one of the main priority of the EC3 is taking down botnets, basically. So that's why for 2014, we saw, at least in Europe, because this is the main aim of the report, we saw it kind of like decreasing. And it's also very interesting. I didn't want you to be bored by all this information, but it's interesting because you have also this data divided as for target, okay? So if you're gonna look at the report, if you need any help, I will leave you my contact, so please ask me for more sources. Basically, you will see that these different threats are also put in relation with the different type of target. So I don't know, mobile computing, national critical infrastructures, I mean, wearable devices, for example. So it's interesting. And then I came up with the wonderful list. Clearly can be improved, but I tried to summarize also kind of the things that we heard yesterday. And I tried to summarize which are the big expectations, let's say, for 2015. Well, espionageware and cyberwar are definitely kind of like increasing, and we're seeing this more and more. The Internet of Things attack frequency, profitability, and severity is kind of like increasing. Well, this is very easy to understand because we have everything interconnected, and that's one of the provision, let's say, that is carrying the security industry most. Government-sponsored attackers are increasingly attacking sensitive systems. It was kind of like the year of ransomware, but we see it evolving, for example, in the cloud and against mobile. We have some specific attacks. I pick a couple, but for example, I decided to pick the Shellshock Sparks Unix and Linux attacks that we started to see them, and they're kind of like increasing. New evasion tactics for sandboxing. And, well, the digital payments is always like the very interesting environment, let's say, for criminals. And we see that post-attacks are increasing and evolving in the digital payment landscape. Trust me, the very few slides with pies and charts and everything. There's an interesting website. It's called Hackmageddon. I don't know if you know it. Basically, it's kept by a researcher, okay? So again, I like this website because basically what he's doing is collecting all the different data breaches and big attacks during 1 month. And also it's divided for quarter and these kind of things. And it's putting them all together and try to have a percentage. So still the motivations behind the attack are mainly cybercrime, and with cybercrime, we mean, let's say, pure cybercrime. So criminals that are chasing your money, and I would say chasing your data, okay? Activism is still a good percentage, but definitely a sort of like decreasing compared to the golden age of hacktivism. And then we have cyber espionage and cyber warfare, as I mentioned to you before, they are kind of like increasing. I always like the slide of the targets because it gets the idea that we are all targeted. Okay, basically we can have some industries and some sector of our economies that are more attacked than others. I mean, government and industries are extremely interesting for the reason that I said before, so money and data. But it's also true that there are all the other sectors like finance, organization. We got, for example, last year, and I don't know how many people from the US are here, but for example, there was between 2013 and 14, there was a big hype, for example, in attack against universities. Why? Because they have something that is extremely valuable, even more than banks sometimes, which are the data of the people, basically. So they were heavily attacked for getting their databases out. And the interesting thing about data And why it's so interesting for criminals. It's because once you spend the money is gone. If you steal data, you can use it in a very different way. You can create the fake profiles. You can sell it. Okay, you can sell it, for example, in the underground economy. So you can make money out of the data that you've stolen. And well, clearly, single individual law enforcement have been targeted as well. Internet services, online services, but the big targets are still government and industries. And also regarding the technique, funny enough, unknown is still one of the it's still one of the, unfortunately, one big category. Yesterday, I was discussing about attribution, okay? About how much we need to talk about attribution and how much we need to really understand what's behind an attack. And again, coming back to the issue of journalists, I don't know if you have the same feeling, but the impression is that since technology is moving so fast, we always need to move so fast. And clearly, there's an important thing that is called incident response, so I totally understand it. But on the other hand, for example, the communication of the incidents is very tricky. Because the feeling that you have is that, oh, something happened, we need to report it immediately. We need immediately to talk about it. But even though technology, cyberspace, and criminals as well are moving very fast, sometimes we need also to give ourselves time, and especially to the people dealing and trying to prevent and fight cybercrime, to have the time to collect all the information and to have the big picture. I don't know if you were following the Sony attack, for example, from last year. And it was funny because every day there was a different attacker, a different target, a different reason behind it. And still, experts are debating about who's really behind the attack. And still, we are trying to understand how they did it and how and which are the consequences, for example. For the who are they, the reason why I didn't explain what Unicry is because a person can do this for me.
Well, I say nothing, but actually there is one teeny-weeny little research unit in Turin, Italy, called the Hackers Profiling Project. And they are doing some fantastic research into the characteristics, into the abilities and the socialization of hackers. But because they're a UN operation, maybe that's why governments and corporations aren't that interested in them, and because it's a UN operation, of course, it lacks funding. But I think they're doing very important work, because where we have a surfeit of technology in the cybersecurity industry, we have a definite lack of, call me old-fashioned, human intelligence. Now, so far I've met...
Well, apart from the fact that, as he said, we lack funding, but apart from this small detail, it was interesting because at one point this guy, his name is Misha Glenny, I don't know if you have ever heard of him, he's a journalist and a writer, and at one point he got very interested into he was an expert in the Western Balkans. And at one point, he got very interested in what we were doing with hackers profiling. Hackers profiling is one of I would say, where everything started. It's our first project. It started in 2004. So yesterday, I was discussing with somebody, and I was saying that project wouldn't be possible nowadays because cyberspace really changed, and the population in cyberspace really changed, especially from, let's say, a criminal point of view. So what we did was trying to apply the technique of criminal profiling to the world of hackers. And why we did that? Because there was a guy, he was the first Italian hacker caught in 1995, I think. At one point he said, listen, but I'm not a bad person. I really wanted to understand. In that case, he hacked into the Bank of Italy system. And he said, I didn't want to do anything bad. I want to show them that there was a vulnerability. And so we started discussing with him, and we said, well, why don't we try to understand which are the real motivations behind the attacks, which are the real motivations that are moving basically the hackers community, and if it's possible to make any distinction with cybercriminals. I mean, today we use the word, and I use the word hacker because it's a kind of like a commonly agreed term, but it's true that we should be careful sometimes in making the right distinction. And since the idea of the talk is to try to understand how there was a change in the hackers community and also in the, let's say, cybercrime and cyberspace environment, up to here, I think it's more or less the idea that also Hollywood movies gave to us. So, like the first generation driven by the need for knowledge, those are also a lot of the kind of like Silicon Valley tycoons that we're seeing right now. So between the first and the second generation, the third generation driven by curiosity, establishing network, information sharing. When we come to the fourth generation, more or less between the year 2000, something changed. I remember speaking with the general manager of the Australian CERT, and he said a very important thing. At one point he said, when money came into place, that's when internet changed. And it's kind of like true, because up to here, hackers were kind of like driven by the sake of curiosity, try to understand how things were made and try to expose vulnerabilities and so on and so forth. At one point they said, but why don't we use this type of like skills for profit, okay? And there's also, I mean, for example, in our research, we defined the different possible profiles of hackers, going from script kiddies to kind of like professional hackers. And I remember, and I smile now when I think about it, because how we were naive, kind of. The first phase of the project was between 2004 and 2006-07. And at that time, we guessed a couple of profiles. The profiles that we guessed were the government agent, the military hacker. Okay, we said that thanks to the information that we got from the underground community and thanks to the information that packaging it with the information that we got from governments and the information that we got from the private sector, from the industry, we think that these are profiles that might emerge in the future, but we're not sure, because clearly we didn't interview a military hacker at that time. And actually, it's kind of like what we're seeing today. I mean, nowadays, I would say there's an increase in the numbers of those type of hackers. Let's put it in this way. What I really would like to, stress, Misha in the video was saying that basically we need money, that we lack funding. The nice thing about this project was that it was really one of the best experience that I had in doing projects, because basically it was at almost no cost. And we had an amazing answer from the community. I was really shocked by that, because usually to put in place some, let's say, some sort of like research and different phases of the project and so on and so forth, you immediately think, how I'm gonna do it? I need money for doing that. And in that case, it was incredible how much we had support, also from the institution, but especially from the, let's call it hackers community. And still, I have a lot of friends there, because they try to help with the project, trying to say, yes, we need something that is explaining what we are doing and which are our ideas and what we would really like to say, let's say, to the world. And on the other hand, it was a very good experience also with the private sector that gave us a lot of information, and it was really helpful in trying to get some results out of it. Other than data, there's another very interesting and kind of like scary focus for criminals, which is intellectual property. Again, I think it started in 2013, more or less, and this is a topic that I feel kind of like very close for one reason. It's true that a database of intellectual property is not easy to monetize as a database of pure data, okay, as a database of like, I don't know, names and credit cards data and these kind of things. But it's true that it can be extremely valuable if you have a very good buyer. And why I feel it close? Because, well, I come from Italy, the accent would tell. For example, we were kind of like severely hit by the crisis. Therefore, all the big industries, all the big players went away. And I would say that 99% of our industries are small, medium enterprises. And one of the core business of Italy, it's the made in Italy, okay? So designs, and now we have a lot of startups, for example, investing a lot of young guys that gets together and try to invest a lot in, I don't know, new ideas, in technology, for example. Now we have the Expo in Italy, so they are all focusing in trying to understand how to better manage, for example, food and these kind of things. If you have an idea, you need to protect it. And nobody is thinking at the very beginning, we need to protect it also from an information security point of view. And that's where the risk come into place. I remember I was at a closed door presentation at the Navy, and it was 2 years ago, and I was really like surprised because there was one big defense contractor. The Italians in the room perfectly know who he is because we have one. But that industry, basically, they showed the picture of an army helicopter, okay? And they said exactly the same picture, saying this was something that we think was made by the Chinese, for example. In that case, was the Chinese. And they said it's exactly the same. Either one of the two, either an insider, okay, which is another interesting category that we're seeing, or they hack into our system. I mean, there was no way that they could do exactly with the same details and with the same accuracy of the one that we are building. And this was kind of like very interesting because I'm mentioning small, medium enterprises because for them, stealing the plan of something that they are doing, stealing intellectual property might mean severe damages, okay? Clearly a bigger industry can have a sort of like leverage other assets, but still it might be a big thing. Which type of data are stolen? Well, everything. Now there's a big hype on medical records. I don't know if you're following a bit information security in the health sector, for example. We go from payment data to authentication, copyrighted material, and any type of classified information, either from corporate or government, but also to personal information. Yesterday I was discussing about the fact that usually we go out from this type of talk all paranoid. Okay, I guess that being in this community, your level of paranoia is pretty high already. But believe me, that usually all the people, especially maybe not working in this environment, think, oh my goodness, I have to download the super apps and I have to take care of all my data and these kind of things, which is a good thing. What I'm suggesting is always, you need to understand which is the level of privacy and security that fits you. And that's why it's so important to have good knowledge and awareness on these topics, because then you can decide which is the level of paranoia that you are comfortable with in your everyday life. Coming back to cybercriminals, well, we all see, as I mentioned before, Hollywood movies, and I think this is brilliant. The FBI at one point, they decided to have a dedicated page to the most wanted cybercriminals, and this guy is extremely interesting. He was supposed to be the creator of the worm Zeus. I guess that more or less all the people in the room heard about it. And recently, the reward went up to $3 million US, which it's kind of like a big amount of money for information leading to the arrest of this guy. And if you go to the webpage, it's interesting because every person has his own, let's say, personal information profile. And these are the people that, for the US, are the biggest threat from a cyber point of view. As I told you before, at one point, in more or less in 2006 and 2007, we stopped doing the first phase of the project, and we needed to ask ourselves a question. Should we continue with the project in the way that we're doing this? Or maybe we should try to understand which is the complex environment that we're living today. And also, are we still seeing, because when we did the first part of the project, there was still a lot of, like, I would say, a lone hacker. And they were getting into communities slightly, but more for sharing information, for kind of like sharing a similar technique, but not really for carrying out attacks together. Whilst at one point, we saw an increase of attacks that for sure had somebody a little bit more organized behind the attack. I remember when there was the issue of Stuxnet. Do you remember it? And I remember at the very beginning, the very first claims were, oh, a hacker invented the Stuxnet virus. And we were like, seriously? One person in this room, for example, can code that? Well, you need money, you need human resources, you need time. Also, it's very difficult sometimes to explain that we need to move away from the idea that there's this super geeky guy that is coding in his room and he clicked a button and it enters into the Pentagon. Well, no. I mean, it's much more complicated than that. And maybe you that are dealing with this every day, you perfectly know this. But that's the difficulty also to explain this type of topic out to the public. That it's kind of like there's a level of complexity that is different when we talk about cyberspace and we merge it with the groups. We merge it with the landscape, for example, of organized criminals. This is coming back to the very boring statistics and data. I don't know if you have heard of this report, but have a look at it, because it's putting together not only information security data, but it's merging it with the experience of the law enforcement. It's called IOCTA, which is the Internet Organized Threat Assessment. I think it's biennial. And for example, for this year, they're seeing, well, clearly cybercrime is increasing in scale and impact. The heaviest target is the Internet of Things. And also the service-based criminal industry. I remember yesterday there was a presentation highlighting how DDoS, for example, how you can buy DDoS, how you can rent and buy botnet. I will show it to you in a second. And again, move away from the idea that you need to be a super skilled hacker for carrying out your attack. Now you can find everything you need, all the different services and goods that you need online. Why it's so interesting for criminals to get this link between organized crime and cybercrime. Again, a picture that tells you nothing, but tells you just one thing. It's extremely complicated already without the internet, okay? This is showing, for example, the different typical activities of organized crime. I was previously, many years ago, I was working on pure, let's say, organized crime. I was working on human trafficking. I was working between Italy and Nigeria. And at that time, it was extremely complicated because every crime is made up of several other crimes. So you have smuggling of migrants. Usually criminals are involved into, for example, drug trafficking, counterfeit products, weapon trafficking, for example, contraband and all these type of activities. The internet was a big game changer for several reasons. Well, because it's fast, it's free, because it creates immediately link. The thing that it was really striking for me was that coming from Italy, unfortunately, we have kind of like expertise on organized crime, and also studying the different type of organized crime. I was working also in the Balkans, in the southeastern European area, and in Latin America, in Costa Rica. And at that time, you had kind of like your pillars, okay, for dealing with organized crime. So you have family ties, you have a clear, more or less, geographical distinction, because criminals get together because they have a common cultural background. With the internet, it's everything blowing up, because you don't need anymore to meet in person, first of all. You don't have anymore this kind of like big cultural gap, because you are in a sort of like big community, and you feel close to each other in a quicker way. Also, coming back to how sophisticated needs to be the attack. I remember speaking one day with, it was 4 or 5 years ago, when China came out as a big player and kind of like as a big threat. And I was discussing with the head of security of verification company, big one, and I said, okay, so you really fear the Chinese. And he was like, you know what? I mean, most of the attacks that we are receiving are from Europe. Specifically, at that time, was from Germany, for example. And the problem is not so much the country, the problem is the scale. They're massive. And for example, what he was telling me is true that you have some very sophisticated type of attacks. Stuxnet is a good example because it's a kind of like sophisticated in the way that it was conceived, then easily deployed, let's put it in this way. But the plan behind that was kind of like sophisticated. But you don't need to have sophisticated attacks anymore. The problem that we see is the massive amount of attacks that companies or governments are receiving every day. Don't think that they are, as I mentioned before, I mean, just geeks going around and try to hack into different systems. They get together in groups, but they have organized groups, which is changing. I mean, which is a kind of like a game changer as well. I mean, they are not just getting together just to do the attack. They have kind of like structures. They have people with different roles. I remember, maybe Anton can help me on that, but I remember when I was studying at the very beginning the Russian organized crime, like RBN and all these guys, and it was incredible. They had LinkedIn pages. They had people answering to the call center, okay? The RBN, the innovative market in Ukraine, it was amazing because it was a kind of like a criminal company, but a real company with a business plan, with people giving you information, with people giving you the price tag for the services. I'm gonna end in 5 minutes, and I'm gonna just leave you with some, let's say, hints. These are the factors that are kind of like contributing to the increase of organized crime that we see in cyberspace. Financial crisis, why? Well, because if there's no money, usually, historically, criminality is flourishing, but also because it's offering a kind of like easy way out for a lot of young people. How many of you have heard of Hackerville? Okay, Hackerville is this, again, I love criminals because they're kind of like very creative. There's this place in Romania. It's a very small city that I'm not able to pronounce, but it was called the Hackerville by the FBI and by the international law enforcement because basically what they did was concentrate all the different criminality. Romanians are, as Italians are very famous for organized crime, they are very famous, for example, for attacks to payment systems, okay, so credit cards and these kind of things. And for example, they had all the hackers concentrated in one city. And what it was interesting, I was reading an interview of one of the guys that were caught, and he said, I mean, I had to pay for the university. I did nothing but sacrifice. The government speaks only about crisis. What else should I do? I mean, I have very good tech skills. They offered me a job. Why not? Well, small, medium enterprises, weak link, as we mentioned before. The ICTs in emerging economies. Why? Because something that can happen very far away from us, I know that you're used to it because of the globalization of the internet and so on and so forth, but can affect us. My first credit card hack was in 2007, I think, when I was going to Nigeria. And it was the perfect phishing scheme, and I fell into it in like 10 seconds because I had to do my visa. Okay, I put all the information in a super legit website. It was super legit. Luckily, I was using a prepaid credit card, and like 30 seconds after I put the number of the credit cards, my bank called me and she said, oh, where are you putting your credit card number into? And I was like, oh, I want to go to Nigeria. I want to have my visa. And she was, well, throw away your credit card because, I mean, it was hacked really easily. And the guys were based in Nigeria. So something that happened very far away from us can have an impact on what we are doing every day. And then the availability and accessibility of hacking tools online. These are just examples, very easy and quick statistics that you can get from different reports. Here, for example, you have how much the zero-day vulnerabilities are in black and gray markets. At one point, I don't know if you were following this issue, but there was all this narrative about how much your social media account cost in the underground economy. And for example, you can see here, the data are a little bit older from 2013. But for example, Facebook, Twitter account were kind of like very cheap because everybody has Facebook and Twitter, whilst, I don't know, iTunes or Groupon at that time was not that widespread. So it cost a little bit more. Now, I guess that the prices are more or less the same, but this is how we cost, basically. I finished with two quick cases. One, it's the carding operation, and the other one, it's at the port of Antwerp for closing with two main concepts. One concept is, as I mentioned before, we need to move away from the idea of organized criminal groups as we were used to, okay? And this is a good operation. I mean, it's kind of like complex because they created, the FBI established an underground carding forum called Card or Profit, functioned with OPSEC. They basically, there was this kind of like vet system for new members. It was protected against DDoS attack via Cloudflare that we discussed yesterday. And the site looked perfectly legit, okay? And basically, the people exchanged stolen identities, credit card information, so on and so forth. I mean, this was a super big operation. It led to 24 arrests. And this was something that interested to me because I said, okay, 24 arrests, who were the guys behind it? And the guys behind it are people from Georgia, California, Kentucky, New Mexico, Italy, and not an Italian citizen. So it gets another level of complexity. New York, Arizona, Florida, Japan, Massachusetts, Norway, and New York. And this is telling you how difficult it is because you cannot apply anymore the kind of like idea that we usually have about dealing with organized criminal group. Cyberspace changed all the kind of like strict idea that we had and the information that we had regarding these groups, and now we are faced with different type of challenges. And then this is an interesting case, as I mentioned. I mean, criminals are very creative, and there are two cases that I really like. One, have you heard of the drone transferring drugs? This was brilliant. Because basically, and it was funny because the point is, I never thought about using a drone for transferring illegal goods. And they were smart because they thought, okay, the drone have an autonomy of like 1 or 2 hours at that time. At that time, it was not, regulated. So the aerial space was not regulated regarding drones. So why don't use it to move the drug from Mexico to the United States? It's a very close border. Okay, so you don't need to make it fly for such a long time. Let's try. Unfortunately, the drone fell down, so that's how we know that they were trying to move the drug. But this was creative. Another creative way, I have to smuggle drug into a port, okay? And I'm not a super techie. What I can do, I hire a hacker. I hire a hacker, and I ask him, why don't you hack into the tracking system of the port of Antwerp? And so thanks to that, they were kind of like sneaking the illegal drugs in perfectly, what they seemed perfectly legit container, okay? And they smuggled the drug in, and it went on for a couple of years, so not just a one-cent operation. And basically, the theft of whole containers tipped off the police, and they start saying, there's something strange going on. Well, challenges are all the things that you have heard during these days. The only thing that I would like to stress, and I guess also it's in the spirit of the project, is that without the community, we cannot do anything. There are no governments and no private sector company that can deal with these challenges alone, and definitely we need to try to find ways to properly cooperate. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.